locked in a wagon train ditch. When her group moved on, a Lakota chief found her and stayed. The rifle was cold when I picked it up. Not cold the way a rifle gets overnight, cold the way metal gets when it hasn't been touched in days, when the sweat and warmth of a hand has long since left it and the iron has gone back to being just iron again. I turned it over in my hands. A settler's gun. Single shot, percussion cap. The wood of the stock cracked along the grain and wrapped tight with a strip of leather that someone had cut in a hurry. The strap was a woman's belt. I could tell, by the width and the tooling, along one edge flowers, small and pressed light, the kind of decorating that takes time. I stood there at the edge of the draw and looked down. She was at the bottom of it. Not dead. I could see the rise and fall of her. But her left leg was wrong. The angle of it, where it crossed over the other, and she was too still for a sleeping person, passed out from pain, or from cold, or both. The wagon ruts in the hardpan above the draw told me everything. The train had come through here. Maybe 2 days ago. 3, at most. The wheel marks were sharp cut, not yet softened by wind. They had gone west. They had left her. I stood at the top of the draw for a while, long enough that a hawk circled twice overhead and moved on. I was not in the habit of involving myself in the business of settlers. My people had good reason not to be. We were 3 seasons past the treaty that had given us nothing and taken the Powder River hunting grounds. And the soldiers who enforced that treaty were the same soldiers who called what we did on our own land raiding. I had 12 men with me, spread thin along the ridge behind me, and every one of them would have ridden past that draw and said nothing, because that was the sensible thing. I went down anyway. She heard me coming, or felt the ground shift, or smelled the horse because her eyes were open when I reached her. Dark eyes, the color of creek water when the mud has settled. She was looking at me, and she was not screaming, and she was not begging, and she was not reaching for the rifle I was carrying. She was just watching me, taking me in the way you take in something you don't yet have a category for. I set the rifle down beside her, barrel pointed away from both of us. She looked at it. I said, in English, and my English was better than most men assumed. I had learned it from a trapper named Garrett, who had lived among us for 11 winters. I said, "Your leg is broken." She said, "I know." That was the first thing. 2 words. Not "please help me," and not "don't hurt me," and not "where is my husband?" "I know," said flat, the way a person says something they have already made their peace with. Her name was Cora Adele Marsh. She told me that later, after I had set the leg, which was not easy, and which she bore without a sound except for one sharp breath through her teeth at the moment the bones seeded, and after I had built a fire low in the draw where the walls would hold the heat and the light wouldn't carry far. She told me her name like she was presenting credentials, like she wanted me to know she was a person with a full name, not a settler woman left in a ditch. I told her mine. She tried to say it and could not make the sounds in the right order, so I told her what it meant in her language. She thought about that for a moment. She said, "That's a name that suits you." I did not ask how she came to be left behind. I had a guess, and she confirmed it later, in pieces. The way people tell hard things, a little at a time, when they feel safe enough. The wagon captain had been a man named Gruder. She had been traveling with her husband's brother's family, because her husband was 2 years dead from fever, and the family had decided to go west, and she had decided the same. Gruder had not liked her. That was the plain of it. She had challenged him once over how he was rationing water at a dry crossing, and he had not forgotten. When she had fallen from the moving wagon, the wheel had caught a hidden rock, and she had been thrown off the back seat. Gruder had told the family she had gone ahead to scout, and had driven on. She told me this the second day, when the fever that comes from broken bone had lifted enough that she could talk in full sentences. I asked her what the family had done. She said, "They believed him, or they were afraid not to." I sat with that. The fire between us was small. Outside the draw, the night was hard, January cold, the kind that finds every gap in cloth and settles there. I had sent 9 of my men back to the winter camp. 2 remained with me, Lakota and my cousin Chayton, camping at the top of the draw. They did not come down unless I asked. They were watching the ridgeline, which was their job, and they were not asking me questions, which was their wisdom. I had buffalo robes, enough for her and enough for myself. I had dried meat and pemmican. I had willow bark, which I had Chayton boil into tea for the fever and the pain. I had bone splints, which I set along the break and bound with strips from my own pack. I had done this before, set bones. Not because a chief is a medicine man, but because, in 38 years of living close to the ground, a man learns what he needs to know about bodies when they break. She drank the willow tea and did not complain about the taste, which was bitter and foul. She slept that second night without fever. The third morning I woke before the light was full and she was already awake, watching the strip of sky above the draw go from black to gray to the pale nothing color that comes before the sun. There was frost on everything, on the grass at the edge of the fire pit, and on the edge of her robe, and on the barrel of her rifle, where it still lay beside her. She said, without turning her head, "You could have ridden past." I didn't answer that. It wasn't a question. She turned and looked at me then. The morning light was coming in thin and sideways, and it found the planes of her face. She was maybe 30, maybe a little younger. The kind of woman whose age the wind and the sun have complicated. She had a jaw that was too strong to be called pretty, the way people usually mean that word. She was pretty in a more substantial way, like something that was going to be there for a long time. She said, "Why didn't you?" I thought about lying. Not a real lie, but the polite kind, something like, "I thought you might know the country," or, "We found your horse." But I did not lie to her. I am not entirely certain why. Maybe because she had already proven she could hear a hard truth without flinching. I said, "I don't know." She nodded, like that was a satisfying answer. Like honesty was the thing she had been checking for. We stayed in that draw for 9 days. I want to say that slowly, because people who have not spent 9 days in a draw in January, with a broken-legged woman, and 2 watchful men on the ridge above, and a hard plain all around, may not understand what 9 days means. It means long. It means the fire becomes a rhythm. It means you learn how a person breathes when they are sleeping, and how they breathe when they are pretending to sleep, and what sound their voice makes first thing in the morning before they have cleared it. It means conversation, not because there is nothing else, but because there is nothing else. She asked me questions the way a careful person asks questions, one at a time, with space after, like she was letting each answer settle before she put weight on the next one. She asked about the winter camp. How many people? Where? I told her what I chose to tell her. She asked about the treaty, and I told her more than I had planned to, because the treaty was still a raw thing and because she listened without flinching or defending. She said, "That's a theft. Plain. No hedging." I said nothing. She said, "I'm not defending it. I'm just saying what it is." On the 4th day, she asked me to help her sit up straighter. And I came around behind her, and she leaned back against me while I packed the robe behind her, and when I was done, she did not move away immediately. She sat there for a moment with her back against my chest, and then she moved forward and said, "Thank you." Her hair smelled like wood smoke and something else underneath, something clean, like creek water in summer. I went back to my side of the fire and told myself nothing about it. On the 6th day, Lakota came down and spoke to me quietly in Lakota. He said there were riders, 2 of them, coming from the east, moving slow. Settlers or soldiers. He could not yet tell. I went up to the ridge with him and lay flat at the top and watched. 2 men on horseback. Not soldiers, no blue. No formation. They stopped below us, on the plain, and then turned south, away from the draw, and rode on. When I came back down, she could tell from my face that something had happened. I told her. I said, "Half a day's ride." She said. I said, "Not yet." She looked at me. She said, "I've ridden with worse." I said, "You'll make the break shift." She held my eyes for a moment, checking whether I was dismissing her or telling the truth. I was telling the truth, and she decided she believed me. She looked away. On the 7th day, she asked me about my wife. I had not talked about Winona. I did not, as a rule. She had been dead for 4 winters, taken by the same fever that had cut through the camp the year after the treaty, when the government rations finally came spoiled and people ate them because they had nothing else. Winona had been, I am not going to find the right word, in any language. She had been the thing that made the world have direction. After her, I had direction too. I still knew which way was north and which way was south. I still knew my responsibilities, and I fulfilled them. But the direction did not feel like it was toward anything. I told Cora this. Not all of it at once. In the way I said, over that evening and into the night. While the fire burned low, and she asked quiet questions, and I answered them honestly, which was a thing I had not done with anyone about Winona. She said, when I was done, "She sounds like someone worth grieving that hard." I said, "She was." She looked at the fire for a long time. Then she said, "My husband Thomas was a kind man. He wasn't large. He was a kind, steady man, and I loved him, but I never felt like the world would end without him." I said, "Love doesn't come in one size." She looked up at me. Something shifted in her face. Or maybe in the air between us, the way a temperature can change without a wind beginning. Just a slow reordering. She said, "No, I suppose it doesn't." I put more wood on the fire. It was not necessary. I did it anyway. On the 9th day, I carried her up out of the draw on my back, one arm under her knees and one around her back. And she held the 2 rifles and did not make a sound when we went up the steeper part, where I had to step sideways along the frozen clay. Dakota and Chayton had the horses ready. I lifted her up to Chayton's horse. Chayton would ride with Dakota, and she gathered the reins and sat straight in the saddle, her broken leg lying along the horse's left side in the splints. She looked out at the plain, white and flat and enormous. The sky above it, the pale, cold blue of deep January. She looked at me. She said, "I don't have anywhere to go, you know." I said, "I know." She said, "I mean, I could go back east. There's nothing holding me to this country." She paused. "But I'm not going back east." I looked at her for a moment. The morning light was hard and clean, and she was sitting up straight on that horse, with her broken leg in my splints, and her hair loose from whatever she'd used to bind it. And she was looking at me with those creekwater eyes, and she was not pretending anything. I said, "There's room in the camp." She said, "All right." That was the second thing. 2 words again. Not "thank you," and not "what will people think," and not "are you certain." All right. Said the same way she'd said "I know," like a person who has already done the internal accounting and is ready to move. We rode out onto the plain. The winter camp was set in a bend of the creek, where the cottonwoods gave shelter, and the hills behind it broke the north wind. We came in from the south, and the children saw us first, the way children always do, and they ran ahead of us, calling out. And by the time we reached the outer edge of the camp, there were people watching. I had been gone 9 days, which was not unusual, but I had brought back a white woman on a horse, which was, I want to be honest about what those first days in the camp were. They were not easy. There was suspicion, and there was anger. And there was a woman named Lone Bear's wife who said things to Cora's face that Cora could not understand, but could certainly read from the tone. There were men who came to me privately and said this was not wise. One elder, a man I respected, said to me, "She is a bridge to trouble." I heard him. I did not argue. I said only that I would not put a woman out in January. He looked at me for a long time and then he said, "You are not doing this because of January." I said nothing. He walked away, and there was something in how he walked away, not angry. More like a man who has just understood something he was not sure about before. Cora learned fast. I don't mean she was charming or eager, or that she performed gratitude. I mean she watched, and she paid attention, and she did the work that was available to her, even with the broken leg, sitting and working with her hands, scraping hides, and sorting dried meat, and mending things, because she was not a person who could sit still and be tended to. She learned words. Not many at first, but the right ones. The words for the ordinary transactions of the day. The polite forms of address. The things children teach you because they think it's funny, and you can afford to be laughed at. She won over the children in about 4 days. She lost Lone Bear's wife over a thing that happened in the 3rd week, when one of the old women slipped on the ice near the creek, and Cora was the closest person, and went into the water after her without hesitating, bad leg and all, and pulled her out. After that, Lone Bear's wife still didn't like her exactly, but she stopped saying things to her face. The leg healed, not fast, but straight. I had said it well. In the 4th week I let her start putting weight on it. She stood for the first time leaning against the center pole of the lodge I'd given her, which was a spare lodge. Not my own. And she stood there, with her jaw set and her eyes somewhere else, the 1,000-yard look of someone in serious pain pretending otherwise. And she took one step, and then she looked at me and she said, "Good." I said, "Good." She didn't smile. Neither did I. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was a working moment, between two people who understood the work. She moved into full walking by the 5th week, with a stick. And by the 6th week, she didn't need the stick, but kept it because the ground was uneven. By the 7th week she was riding again, short distances, and Lakota let her try his horse, which was a compliment he had not extended to many people in his life. I am not going to make this into a story where everything arranged itself neatly. It didn't. There were hard nights. For her, alone in that lodge with whatever she was thinking about. There were mornings where I could see she had been crying, and she would look at me, and I would say nothing because there was nothing to say that would help. There were moments when I caught her looking west, the direction her wagon train had gone, and I would not pretend I couldn't see it. The grief for a life interrupted does not respect the quality of the new circumstances. A person can be in a good place and still grieve the life they were going to have. I knew this. I had known it for 4 winters. One evening in the 2nd month, she came and sat beside me outside the lodge where I was cleaning the rifle she had brought down from the draw. I had cleaned it and oiled it and gotten it shooting true again, which had taken 2 days of work, and she sat beside me without speaking for a long time. Then she said, "I want to ask you something." I said, "Ask." She said, "Do you miss it? Being not alone? Having someone?" I put down the cleaning rag. I looked at the rifle in my hands. I said, "Every day." She was quiet. I said, "You?" She said, "I didn't. For a long time. I thought I was made different. For being alone." She paused. "I don't think that anymore." The fire outside my lodge was throwing light across the camp, and the smell of the evening meal was coming from the other lodges, and a dog barked somewhere at the edge of the camp, and then stopped. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a place that is alive. She said, "I think I was just waiting for someone worth not being alone with." I looked at her. She was looking at the rifle in my hands. Then she looked up and met my eyes, and she did not look away. I said, "Cora." She said, I know it's complicated." I said, "It is complicated." She said, "I'm not asking you to make it simple. I'm just telling you something true." I sat with that. The thing about Cora Adele Marsh was that she never asked you for more than the truth. She didn't dress it up and she didn't soften the angles. and she didn't perform innocence about what she meant. She told you something true and then she let it sit, and she did not push. She had done this from the second day in the draw, when she'd told me about Gruder and the family without asking for my pity, and she was doing it now. I said, "I've been watching you since the first morning." She said, "I know." I said, "I don't know what is going to come of it. The world doesn't make easy room for this." She said, "The world didn't make easy room for me in a ditch either." I looked at her for a moment. Then I set down the rifle. What I did was this. I put my hand over hers where it rested on her knee. Just that. I laid my hand over hers, which was calloused and capable and cold in the February night, and I held it. She turned her hand over and held mine back. We sat there in the firelight with the ordinary sounds of the camp all around us. And it was not a resolution to anything. It was not an ending. The world was still complicated and would remain so. And the men who had taken our land were still taking it. And the spring would bring hard decisions, and there was a wagon captain named Gruder who I thought about sometimes with a particular coldness. There were things ahead that would not be easy. But in that moment I had her hand and she had mine, and neither of us was letting go. Spring came. With spring came riders. 3 of them. Soldiers out of Fort Laramie. Doing what soldiers did. Riding through, counting, taking measure of what was where. They came into the camp with the particular confidence of men who have guns and a government behind them, and who have never had reason to wonder if that is enough. Their sergeant was named Ellis. I had met him before, at the treaty negotiations, where he had stood behind the colonel and looked bored. He was not bored now. He saw Cora. He said, to me, in the way that men like him say things to men like me, not quite a question, and not quite a command. That woman, she, one of the Marsh party? I said. She lives here. He said. She's a white woman. I said. She lives here. He looked at her. She was standing outside her lodge, which was 20 feet away, close enough that she could hear everything. She was standing straight, with the stick she still carried on hard ground days, and her arms were at her sides, and she was looking at Sergeant Ellis with a gaze that would have cut glass. Ellis said, "Ma'am, are you here of your own will?" Cora said, "Yes." He said, "The Marsh party reported a woman lost in the territory." She said, "The Marsh party left me in a ditch." He shifted in his saddle. He looked from her to me, and back again. I could see him trying to find the version of this that fit inside the world he understood, and failing. He said, "We can take you back to the fort. There's a settlement at..." She said, "Sergeant, I'm not lost. I know exactly where I am." He tried once more. He said, "Ma'am, you understand the situation here is..." She said, "I understand the situation completely. Do you need anything else from us?" I well too. A long silence. One of his men shifted his horse, which stamped and blew in the cold air. Ellis said, "Finally, we'll be moving on." They moved on. After they had gone, when the sound of their horses had faded south, and the children who had been hanging back near the lodges came out again, and the camp settled back to its business. She stood in front of me and looked at me, and there was something in her face I had not seen there before. Not the creekwater watchfulness, and not the working steadiness. Something that came from the chest. Something open. She said, "I should have said that better." I said, "You said it fine." She said, "I should have said I should have told him what you did. What you are." She looked at me with that open thing still in her face. "You came down into that draw when you had no reason to. You set my leg and you fed me and you kept me warm and you carried me out on your back." Her voice was steady and even, but I could hear what was behind the evenness. "And you have given me a place, and a people, and you have been patient with me in ways I don't have words for." She stopped. I said, "Cora." She said, "Let me finish. I want you to hear this." She put her free hand against my chest, just flat against it, over the breastbone. "You are a good man, and you are a strong man, and I see you. All of it. The weight you carry, and the way you carry it, and what it costs." She pressed her hand a little harder. "I see it." The camp was carrying on around us, smoke and horses, and the voice of a woman calling to her children, and the sound of an axe somewhere. The ordinary life of a place in spring. I put my hand over hers, same as I had done in February at the fire. I said, "I know you do." That was the thing. That was the whole of it, right there. She saw me. Not just the chief, not just the man who had found her in the draw, not the thing I was to the soldiers, or the thing I was to the settlers, who looked at us from a distance and made their calculations. She saw the weight and the cost of it, and she said so, plainly, in the middle of the afternoon with no ceremony around it. A good woman, telling a man what she saw when she looked at him. You live long enough, do enough things, carry enough weight, and you stop expecting anyone to see it. You do not expect to be thanked. That is not what I mean. But you stop expecting to be truly seen. You do the work, and you carry the load, and you keep your people as whole as you can keep them, in a world that is taking things from them, piece by piece, and you do not require witness for any of it. You have stopped requiring it so long ago that you have forgotten you ever required it. And then a woman with dark eyes and a jaw too strong to be called pretty puts her hand on your chest and tells you she sees. I had no answer for that. I did not need one. She stayed. I want to say that simply because it is the simple and complete truth of it. She stayed. Through the rest of that spring and through the summer, when the buffalo came back in numbers I had not seen in years, and the camp was full and the work was hard and good. Through the fall council, where men from 3 other bands came and sat with me for 4 days and talked about the next year and what the soldiers were doing and what was to be done, and where Cora stayed back in the camp and did not try to be part of what was not hers to be part of, but was there in the evenings when I came back tired, and she had already put food to warm because she had learned my hours and the way I came in after a long council, and what I needed then. She learned the language. Not all of it. It is not an easy language, and she did not pretend otherwise, but enough. Enough that she could speak with the elders directly, and enough that the children would come to her to tell her things. Which is the real measure of a person's standing in any community. Whether the children will come. She could not stay in the women's lodge, because she was not Lakota, and because there were ways of things that were not mine to bend. But there was a lodge that was between things. A lodge that was mine in the sense that everything in the camp was mine to order. And she was there, and I was near. And the arrangement was what it was. People adjusted. People always adjust to what is clearly the situation. There was a morning in the fall, dry and blue, when I came back from a dawn ride along the ridge above the camp, and she was outside her lodge with a knife and a deer hide, scraping in the long, smooth strokes that take time to learn, and that she had learned entirely from watching and trying and failing and trying again. She was working with her full attention, the way she did everything. The light was coming from the east, and it was hitting the side of her face, and she had her hair tied back, and there were flecks of the hide's fat on her forearm. She looked up and saw me, and said nothing. Just looked for a moment. Her eyes going over my face, the way she sometimes did when I had been out early, and she was checking whether something had happened. Checking me the way I checked the horizon. Then she went back to her work. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to, looking at her in the morning light, working, present, belonging to the place in the particular way that is not about birth or blood, but about showing up every day and doing the work and meaning it. I turned my horse back to the rope line. The winter after that was long, and the government rations that came were half what was promised, which was also half of what was needed. And I rode to the agency fort 3 times to argue for the balance, and was told 3 times that the supply chain was what it was, and that next year would be different. The third time I rode out of that fort, I was angrier than I had been in a long time. Not a hot anger, the hot anger I had mostly put away by 30, but the cold kind. The kind that sits in your chest like a coal and does not go out. I came back to the camp after dark and Cora was awake. She was always awake when I came back late from the fort, though she never said so. Never made a point of it. She took one look at me and said, "How bad?" I told her. All of it. The numbers and the colonel's face when he said what he said, and the young lieutenant behind him, who I thought was ashamed but not enough to do anything about it. And the ride back in the dark. She listened to all of it. She did not tell me it would be fine. She did not tell me to have hope. She said, "What do you need to do next?" I told her. We talked through it. The practical of it. Who to send, what to ask, what to accept, and what to refuse. She was not a political person in the way the word is usually meant, but she was a clear-eyed one, and she thought in consequences, which is what politics actually requires. At some point in this talking, it became late, and the fire was down. She got up and put more wood on it and sat back down on my side, not her usual spot across from me. She sat beside me, close, the way she had done in the draw, when she'd leaned against me to sit up and then moved forward. Except this time, she didn't move forward. I said, "You moved." She said. I put my arm around her and she leaned into my side. We sat there with the fire and the dark, and the sound of the winter camp at night, horses shifting. A dog, the creak of the cold wood. She said, into the fire, "I'm not going anywhere." I said, "I know." She said, I said, "I know that too." She tilted her head and looked up at me from where she was leaning, tipping her face to find my eyes. Her face close. The kind of close, where you can see everything. She said, "Do you? Because I need you to know it. Not as a figure of speech. I'm telling you something true. I'm not going anywhere. Not for the soldiers. Not for whatever comes with this winter, or the next one. I am here. Number 3. Number 4. Number 4. I looked at her for a long time. I said, "Cora Adele Marsh." She said, "That's me." I said, "I know it." She searched my face for whatever she was looking for and she found it. Because she settled. Not relaxed exactly, she was not a person who relaxed, but settled. The way a stone settles into the bed of a creek, not going anywhere, part of the water's shape. That spring, after the ice broke on the creek, and the cottonwoods put out their first yellow-green leaves, we buried the man, Gruder. That is not quite right. We did not bury him. We heard that he had been buried at a settlement 70 miles west, dead from a horse accident the previous winter. Cora heard it from a trader who came through, and she came and told me, and then she stood there in the way she had when she was waiting to see if a thing needed to be talked about. I thought about Gruder for a moment. The kind of man who drives away from a woman in a ditch. The kind of man who makes a woman disappear by claiming she went ahead. I said, "Good." She said, "Yes." Nothing else about it. I think about the rifle sometimes. Her rifle, the one I found at the top of the draw, with the cracked stock and the leather belt wrapped around it. The flowers tooled faint along one edge. I fixed the stock that first winter a piece of good ash wood, fitted and pegged and sanded until it was solid. She still has it. She can shoot it better than she could when she owned it before, which is saying something, because she was not a bad shot to begin with. Some mornings I watch her take it down from its place in her lodge, check it, hang it back up. It is the one thing from before that she carried through. There are no wagon-train people in her life now, no brother-in-law's family, no settlement waiting on the other end of a westward track. There is this camp, and this people, and this life, and me. She chose all of it, which means she chose it knowing it was not simple, and was not promised, and would not be easy. She chose it anyway, every morning, which is the only way choosing means anything. I was down in the dark of a draw when I found her. I did not expect to find her. I certainly did not expect what followed. I did not expect a woman who would hear hard truths without flinching and set her own leg and say, "All right," and stay. I did not expect to hear someone say, "I see you," and mean it in the complete way, the weight and the cost way, the way that reaches you in the place that has been alone since Winona. I found a rifle at the top of a draw. I went down. This is what was waiting. She is beside me now as I tell you this. We are outside, and the morning is good, the light is clean, and there are geese somewhere overhead, going north, making that sound. She is mending something, because she is always mending something when she has a free hand. She knows I am telling this. She doesn't mind. She never minds being seen. A while back she looked up at me and said, "You're going to make yourself sound better than you were." I said, "I found you in a ditch. How much better can I make that sound?" She thought about it. She said, "A lot, probably." She went back to mending. The geese have passed now. The sky is wide and clear. I have this land, and this people, and this life, and this woman, who came to me out of a ditch in January, and decided I was worth staying for. A man learns, after enough years, what is real and what is not. This is real.